My name is Jim Jones. I'm going to talk to you about developing a big business strategy based on knowledge flow to value and resulting in a portfolio of programs and projects. But let me talk about a little bit about my background and how I came to this. I have an undergraduate degree in electrical engineering and a master's degree in math from Michigan State University. I worked in the area of CAD/CAM at General Motors for about 20 years, which gave me an opportunity to see the entire engineering life cycle from design to product engineering to manufacturing engineering in the process of delivering this software throughout General Motors. During that time, I received a doctor's degree in systems engineering from the University of Detroit. Before I left General Motors, I was working as a senior staff strategic planner in the strategic planning department of General Motors that reported directly to the president. I had a variety of positions in a company called Simlink. We delivered CAD/CAM engineering Unix-based workstations to companies like Boeing and General Motors and Ford, and both in the United States and in Europe initially. And I did set up the European operation for sales and service. I left there as vice president of software development. I have quite a bit of stock in the company, and the stock was at one point being sold for $10 a share amongst venture capitalists. I'm unhappy to tell you it's now worth zero. In the process, after I left the company, I consulted with major companies, a few of which would be the Lockheed Martin Titan rocket facility, Ford Motor, Siemens in Munich, Ericsson in Stockholm, among maybe 15 or 20 others. In the process, I concluded that knowledge is the fundamental independent parameter of systems engineering. Not money, not parts, not process. So by evaluating how knowledge flows to value within an organization, you can see fairly quickly what the problems are in the organization and how to get from one point in time to a future state that's considered desirable by the senior management. So, with that in mind, what then is knowledge flow to value consulting? It defines a knowledge taxonomy for the enterprise. It defines skill as ability to use one's knowledge and competencies effectively to perform tasks. It classifies a body of recorded knowledge according to that taxonomy. It defines a process framework within which both recorded and unrecorded knowledge being skills, is gathered, communicated, and delivered, measures the way knowledge flows and is communicated in a business, and synthesizes strategy in a portfolio of programs and project charters to optimize the flow of that knowledge to customer value. So, with that in mind, knowledge flow to value identifies 5 problems associated with knowledge in terms of skills. Knowledge walks out the door, people quit. Knowledge hoarding, knowledge is power. If somebody thinks that their knowledge will benefit them, they want to make sure they get credit for it and will withhold it until it's obvious they're the ones who can solve the problem. There's unsubstantiated assertions that pose as facts. We get a lot of that on the internet, we get a lot of that in our politics, but it's also quite prevalent in large bureaucratic companies. Intangible knowledge, and it makes it difficult to manage, and this is the If, for example, a tool and die maker has a lot of skills, um, both from experience and from hand skills. If you're going to have brain surgery, you sure hope that the brain surgeon has great hand-eye coordination in addition to a heck of a lot of experience. And then there's knowledge shelf life. Is it a time-honored truth, or is it old news? And all of that has to be identified as a part of the knowledge flow within an organization. Okay, now for a quick overview of the consultancy itself. Before the consulting engagement, you should know the global competitive business environment. Anybody who's doing a strategy should become intimately familiar with the World Economic Federation's Global Competitive Index. It has 12 pillars. I'll talk about it in a minute. Those 12 pillars represent 159 areas that the World Economic Federation evaluates countries in terms of the quality of the business environment. Then O'Neill's Regional Entrepreneurial Framework, Professor O'Neill's, presents you with a series of activities that are necessary for a region to be friendly to business. And I'll talk about that in a minute. Be able to speak about a company's major competitors. You have to have an idea of what their environment is and how well they're doing in it. What's the percent of the market that they have? Who is considered to be the most innovative? Who's the most reliable? All of those things are things you should be able to speak to if you're speaking to senior level management in the process of developing a strategy for the company. You should know the company's objectives and goals. So before you get in front of anybody, you should have read their annual report and taken some notes about what you think is critical in terms of knowledge flow to value. And you have to provide a way for management to self-assess itself. This is a spider chart of the World Economic Federation's Global Competitive Index, and every country has this spider chart, so you can look at it and see what they think the country's best capabilities are. Now, the good news is the United States frequently is considered the #1 place to do business because of innovative drivers on the left and efficiency enhancers down here. But frequently, if it's going to get a low rating, it gets a low rating in the basic requirements area, particularly because of the macroeconomic environment and some of its government institutions. This is Professor O'Neill's entrepreneurial ecosystem. I'm not going to cover every little detail up here, but basically what it tries to do is evaluate a region in terms of its business friendliness. One of the better regions for it from a technical point of view and from a skill level point of view is the Florida area, but because the government doesn't really acknowledge it as a high-tech area, it can cause heartburn for companies trying to start up here. In the past, that hasn't always been true, but it's true at the moment. Florida perceives itself as a tourist destination, which of course it is, but it would find that there'd be much more revenue generated if it started supporting technology startups around artificial intelligence, virtual reality, and even aerospace. Okay, back to the consulting overview. We talked about before the consulting engagement. When consulting, assess whether money being spent agrees with the goals Interview 2 to 3 senior level managers who identify 20 key interviewees. Interview people, diagram, interview, and validate it with them. Synthesize the results of the interviews to identify problems, observations. Get confirmation from interviewees and senior managers that you're on the right track. Sometimes your observations will be wrong because you had a limited amount of information from your key interviewees. So don't presume that because you've interviewed 20 people and you've synthesized all their comments that you totally understand the company, because there may be several other people you need to interview. Develop a set of solutions and costs to support objectives and goals and resolve problems. And then propose a strategy as a portfolio of programs and project charters. Remember, I talked about there has to be a way for management to self-assess itself. You can make up your own. This one was done by a company called Collective Social Intelligence and is in a book of the same name. And it basically has managers evaluate themselves between 1 and 5 on how well they think the company supports this collaboration within the company, and how well the things that support that collaboration and knowledge flow to value is performed within the company. And so you had strategy and scope, guiding principles, planning and positioning, standards and knowledge, capability and core competencies, training and recruitment, learning, competitiveness, workflow, workspace, IT platforms, and virtual environments. So the management themselves self-evaluate themselves and create a spider chart for themselves, and then talk about how they want to improve various aspects of the 12 points. Remember, we spoke about the consultancy as evaluating what goes on outside and inside the organization. Michael Porter's 5 forces model, Michael Porter is a professor at Harvard, talks about what environment the industry that the company competes in, what are the 5 factors? They're new entrants, buyers, substitute suppliers, and the intensity of the rivalry. So this gives you kind of an overview of how to think and talk about what the company's marketplace is. Internally comes from Hamel and Prahalad, and they talk about the company being driven by core competencies. And once again, we're back to skill sets, and those core competencies are critical to the organization, and they're frequently not that well understood by senior management in various areas of the organization. So it would be up to you as part of this strategy to bring that out. Okay, I've been pontificating on knowledge, and so like philosophers for the last 2,000 years, what is knowledge? Well, knowledge in this sense is knowledge in business, and documents can be noise, data, information, or knowledge. And noise is an incomprehensible jumble of images and text. Just get on Facebook or the internet and you get a feeling for what noise is. Data results from the monitoring events, or it is derived from other data. So data is data. So frequently, if you want to know what's going on with the country, you can get on the government website and see what the data actually is versus what people's various interpretations are. Frequently unsubstantiated suppositions posing as facts. Okay, information summarizes or correlates data organized into platforms and is visualized to support decisions. So information still isn't knowledge. Knowledge is information that's ISO 15489 compliant. So What is ISO 15489? Well, it defines a record as knowledge created, received, and maintained as information by an organization or person in pursuance of legal obligations or in the transaction of business. An ISO 15489 compliant record must have authenticity. That means it's proved to be what it claims to be and created by persons at the time claimed. It must be reliable. It's got to be trusted as a full and accurate representation of contents, which means it's been reviewed by people and said, yeah, that's what it was. Integrity, it's got to be complete and unaltered. And usability can be located, retrieved, presented, and interpreted. Now, if you were to be consulting with a law firm, they want everything on paper with a watermark because they really worry about authenticity and reliability and integrity, because if the minute you start scanning it in, you can mess with it all you want. And the techniques now can be quite good. You can't really tell that it's been messed with. Let me just speak for a minute about service, because in knowledge flow to value, everything is a service. And if you look at engineering services and manufacturing, Boeing has 56,000 engineers, Ford 20,000, Apple 10,000. And there's a sophisticated service relationship between automotive, product, and manufacturing engineering. In this case, product engineers provide information to very knowledgeable customers. In medical services, which is 18% of the GDP, unfortunately, patients or customers must be guided to provide detail about history and the problem and their problem in a medical history questionnaire, and then after a lot of probing and prodding about pain, the doctor must educate the patient to adequately define their problem, to determine causes and viable solutions or interventions. In this case, doctors have considerably more knowledge than patients. So if you consider the difference between engineering and medical customer interaction and generalizing them into a framework to define service personnel's relationship to customers, it provides a method to evaluate knowledge flow to value in the market, in the enterprise. And this has also got to be part of the knowledge flow to value, because part of the knowledge flow to value to customers is making sure they're happy, especially if you're delivering a service. But that's also true as a product, because that product ends up requiring maintenance, and you sure hope that they're happy with the product, and if there is a problem, that they're happy with its resolution. Let's talk about the consultant assessed framework. You can use a variety of techniques. Lean, Six Sigma, you can use one identified in my book, The Document Methodology, but this is a framework based on Six Sigma, and Six Sigma is pretty famous for saying DMAIC, define, measure, analyze, improve, control. And then you have to manage that, and at each point you'll get a business summary, a measurement plan, an operational profile, a business cases, and transition scenarios. So this guides the projects that are part of programs that are used to transform the organization. And then in red up there, you see PMI's project methodology: evaluate, define, start up, and deliver. PMI, Project Management Institute, is a standard for project management. And then that little triangle where it talks about architecture, infrastructure, process, and knowledge is are the dimensions of the knowledge consultancy. when we're talking about knowledge and skills, then we can take advantage of Carnegie Mellon's People CMM, where they talk about work groups and culture. And culture makes information meaningful. Culture gives a person a set of rules by which to behave, and these are knowledgeable, actionable information that suggests how to interpret the situation and what to do next. And the first five are associated with workforce capability, directly related to business performance. Workforce capability is a competitive issue and a source of strategic advantage. It's also the ability, it must be defined in relation to the organization's business objectives. Knowledge intense work shifts the focus from job elements to workforce competencies, and capability can be improved in levels including work group, individual, work group, workforce, and organization. So then we're back to the skill idea of individual competency is a set of observable performance dimensions including knowledge, skills, attitudes, and behaviors, as well as being part of a collective team and working with it. I want to talk now about, I'm going to present 3 slides, and the last slide will be this plus something plus something. And basically, it's how to interview people. This is what you're trying to get when you're talking to somebody that's part of a series of activities where knowledge flows to value. You want to know what the inputs are. What is used by the process, materials, documents, expert advice? Who are the owners and the interveners of the at the top there? What are the controls? What's the start of the process? Document, question, problem, what guides and constrains the work, policy, procedure, budgets, etc. With respect to the outcomes, what are the outcomes, elements of the results, document advice, what's the parent output, who is and what delights the patient, insurance, customer, then what mechanisms support it, who does the work, what systems support the process, what skills and competencies are required, how do people work. Then within the inside the operation itself, the process activities, what are the 6 major functions or 3 to 8 major functions? And then with regard to how are things transformed, what regulatory functions, what services or vendors support the process, and what's the means of communication? So what you're trying then to extract in this interview in approximately an hour is what the person perceives their situation is within the context of the process they're working. Now keep in mind that this person was identified as a key interviewee, so they should be able to communicate what it is they're doing. Now for the most part you should just let them talk, but if they happen to be focused, for example, on just on inputs or outputs or process activities, then you want to interject questions that assures that you will get all of this information. Okay, here we are, back to the defined process again, but now we've added how is the process measured, finance, patient outcomes, learning operations, system cycle times, cost, quality, environmental dimension. All of those things you're trying to extract out of this. And then what are the major sub-processes or tasks? What are the answers to the same questions as the main process? How are the sub-processes broken down? Skills, work volume, natural checkpoints, responsibility, random, ad hoc. Keeping in mind that you're talking here about what I will call an OODA loop, observe, orient, decide, act. And so within that you have culture, traditions, analysis and synthesis, previous experience, new information, and genetic heritage. So all of this stuff is stuff that should come out of the interview. You won't get it all, but the more you can get, the better feeling you can get for how knowledge flows to value. And then down below there, part of something called a viable systems model, what's transformed, who are the actors, who are the suppliers, who are the customers, and who are the owners. Okay, one last thing to fill this in to make it the busiest slide ever are making sure that you cover the 5 dimensions of knowledge transformation critical to support these loops. You've got culture that makes information meaningful. Content is focused on presenting information to evoke desirable behaviors. Process is performed by people to create value for its customer. Technology, what technology architectures are necessary to make this flow? And infrastructure, using global information networks, collaboration technology, and the web. So this is the possibly the busiest slide in the presentation, but it's also one that you can use when you're interviewing people to make sure you've got it covered. We're talking about the processes that make knowledge flow, and this is a high-level functional representation, in my opinion, of every business: market, develop, purchase, deliver, support. This was derived from APQC's process models that have over 1,000 supporting sub-processes. I've modified it some because I didn't like particularly how they represented management, and they put purchase under deliver and a couple of other things. But the benefit of knowing about APQC, and don't ask me what they stand for, I'm pretty sure Q stands for quality, but it's having those 1,200 processes to act as a check as you're developing what could be a fairly large process model. And then supporting that, you have running across the bottom is content lifecycle management, external documents, knowledge documents, capability documents, transaction documents, and management documents. And that will point us in the direction of a taxonomy, which I'll get to later and give you the third busiest slide in this presentation. Okay, here we are again with a few more things added. Note up here you have what I call manage, and here we've got our change methodology, Six Sigma, which we've already talked about. Management is key here because when you remember when I talked about the external and internal factors of the organization, well, what goes on here is more or less of an arbitration between improve and direct. You want to change the organization to make it more competitive in the future, but you got to keep it running if you're going to have the revenue to do that. And then leadership becomes the arbitration between improve and direct to create a budget to drive the organization in the direction it wants to go and still remain profitable. And then you have the enable function here, which keeps knowledge flowing through these processes. And then you have to audit it to make sure you're doing what you said you were going to do. Okay, one more addition to make this the third most complicated slide in the presentation, and one which you might want to print out and carry with you. You have an architecture and infrastructure slide, and you may change these as technology evolves, but you have a portal infrastructure, an API, project management and workflow, document and content management, enterprise systems, and then you have communications, operating systems, repositories. And then underlying all of this thing is an Internet of Things, which is now the new thing. If you want a pretty good explanation of the Internet of Things, the World Economic Federation published a report on that, I think in 2016, under the topic Industry 4.0. And just so you know, I have some idea what the Internet of Things is. Here's a list of the processes over here, some sub-processes, and then what are the lot of the Internet of Things that would support those sub-processes. I'm not going to go into that. You can print it out if you want as a reference, but I'm more concerned about the knowledge flow to value, and then subsequently you can decide, depending on the enterprise you're consulting in, which parts of Internet of Things apply to that enterprise. Okay, I've been talking about taxonomy. Here's a high-level taxonomy. Remember, we talked about knowledge management, transactions, capability, external. The client profile over here is for medicine, but this would vary with industry. These are, and of course, the knowledge under market develop, purchase, deliver, support would vary with regard to industry, but these four in the middle will be relatively invariant with respect to industry. So under management, you've got government documents, strategy documents, change requirements, operations, measures, models. Capability, you got the HRM, employee, technology, and medicine. It would have to be HIPAA compliant. Finance, property management, supplier, knowledge management, and IP documents. And external, you've got agreements, stakeholders, suppliers, competitors, government, economy, environmental, health and safety. So, and if you're in healthcare, you've got patient state, patient portfolio, patient ER, patient operations. So when I put up the major parts of a taxonomy, I don't want you to feel like I sat down for a day or two and invented these categories. These have been derived over, I don't know, 20, 30, 40 consulting assignments. And so you'll find that a lot of these will hold whether or not, whatever industry you're in or with whatever company you're working with. Obviously, I'm not going to talk about every document. If you look over here under client profile, that's oriented around hospitals. The reason I put this up is because they do such an intensive job of monitoring and tracking the patient. So you should be able to derive a lot of the things you're trying to record with respect to customers from this list of documents. Okay, this comes from healthcare, but I think it has universal applicability. This comes from a Lean Healthcare Deployment and Sustainability by Mark L. Dean, who is a consultant. And he's got downtime sickness. Downtime obviously comes out of manufacturing, defects, overproduction, waiting, not using employees' ability, transportation, industry, motion, excess processing, and over here is what goes on in healthcare. But here, this seems to have come out of his consulting with healthcare, and it's called sickness, stress and anxiety, inactivity and waiting, coldness or apathy, knowledge gap, neglect, embarrassment, submission, helplessness, and statistics. So, and on the other side, calm and comfort, progress, caring and warmth, abundance, communication, understanding, engagement, dignity, respect, and empowerment, and special. So if you think about your relationship with your doctor, frequently you call him a good doctor if he's hanging to the right side. But if you have surgery, you'll find that many surgeons are quite arrogant, and you're happy to have high hand coordination and experience. So, but in the service environment, this idea of the sickness acronym can really help in terms of improving customer relationships. So what we have here is why I thought this downtime and sickness was so important. Because if you consider the contact personnel with the customer and then their relationship with the organization, you can see where the contact personnel has to be competent, experienced, skilled, trained, and have a certain personality. The customer has needs and expectations. The organization then has this taxonomy, qualitative processes, support systems, accessibility, and location to support all of this. And then you have your Carnegie Mellon's People CMM in there. You have the process diagram that I put up earlier, plus Industry 4.0, which represents the Internet of Things. So this represents the cycle to keep your customer happy. last but not least, you generate a report, and that report has the preface where you speak to the issues of the methodology that we've discussed. You have the problem overview, which once again is defined in terms of those 5 dimensions: culture, content, process, architecture, infrastructure. Next, you talk about how you're going to measure. Then you have key issues associated with the 5 dimensions again. Then you have business cases, and those business cases in this case won't be your business cases, but here's a knowledge environment, the engineering, submissions, service, and so on. The key issues, you'll have to have a description, basis of position, and statement of position. Business cases include a description, problem, future state, metrics, and benefits. So this is the result of the consulting assignment and the documentation of the strategy that you've put in place. It also has transition scenarios and phases, which will be defined by the portfolio of projects and programs, and then your appendix should include the summary of summary of interviews, architectures, measurements, and a glossary. So, with that in mind, you now are armed with an approach to consult with any major organization to produce a strategy document that will have value. Let's do a quick overview of the knowledge flow to value method, and then we'll follow that with a brief piece of advice on mindset. We talk about the executive assessment. That's what we did before we even got to the company, so we knew how to talk about the company and what their objectives by their own statement was in their annual report. Then we talked about developing a knowledge taxonomy and records, so we know how knowledge flows to value, and that knowledge includes skill sets. From there, we went to process innovation specification, where we look at the processes that drive knowledge flow to value, and we begin to talk about how to optimize that flow. Now, the people and work practice assessment is a realization that all the knowledge to run a business isn't explicitly defined in documents. It's in people's heads and their capability and their work experience and their work practices. So that has to be captured, and an assessment has to be made as to whether or not the people currently in the company have the skills to perform the tasks defined in the future company, and whether or not, if they don't, whether or not they can be trained or if somebody will have to be hired. Once you have an idea of how you want knowledge flow to value and the skills necessary to make it flow, then you can look at the systems requirements and determine what kinds of systems you need to support this, and you can certainly tap into the idea of Industry 4.0 or Internet of Things. All of this requires some kind of business cases to justify the cost of the change, and that will involve a certain amount of postulation about the future state and how the operations will change based on that future state. And from all of this, a portfolio of projects, of programs and projects will be generated to keep the enterprise, to develop the enterprise strategy. And then as to mindset here, big organizations are very complex, and you have to get it through your head that you shouldn't be intimidated by the breadth and depth of your own ignorance. And furthermore, when you're looking at a problem and how to solve it, and you can't think of a way to solve it in your current discipline, look around and see if you can find an isomorphism. Is there something that's different than the way you're used to thinking, but that has the same problem solution setup. So with that in mind, when I say don't be like the person looking under the street lamp for his keys, even though he lost them in the bushes because the light's better over there. Don't just depend on your own knowledge. Recognize that when you attack a problem as big as the ones you'll face in developing a strategy for a company, there'll be a bunch of things you don't know. So plan on learning quickly as you go through this. And lastly, you'll be given approximately 2 months' time, maybe 3 months, to put all this together. What you don't want to do is involve yourself in analysis paralysis. Get the model, get the taxonomy, sketch out the taxonomy, sketch out the processes, identify the work, and come up with a strategy, recognizing that it won't be perfect, but as you implement it, that strategy will change from phase 1 to phase 2 to phase 3. And with that, I thank you for your time, and good luck with your future analysis of big business.